Dear Jay and Kaveh, only much later did it occur to me that that September night in San Francisco may have been the last one of the 20th century. And if the 1930s actually began with the stock market crash of October 1929, or the 60s didn't really start until JFK's assassination in 1963, then this may be true. The last time I'd really given much thought to the previous 100 years had been 9 months before. It had been a couple of days before Christmas, and I'd been kicked out of my apartment. I was spending nearly all my nights in your basement, Jay, looking through hundreds of hours of footage for your next film. Your instructions have been simple enough. Find any images of loss or sadness. So my task that winter, sitting in front of your flatbed editor with a six-pack of Tecate, was to seek out the finest examples of man's inhumanity to man. It was in this spirit, one evening, that I came across this image. A French resistance fighter lobbing a Molotov cocktail into a German troop truck. Now, in most of these sanitized newsreels, this kind of reality is seldom seen. But here it was, and I remember thinking I'd uncovered something that had been hidden. To be honest, I've always felt at odds with the 20th century. Even now, I think I know less about my own generation than that of my father's, who was born in 1912. That on the day of his birth, the Balkan town where his family lived was under bombardment by the Austro-Hungarians. That a little over 30 years later, he was fighting in the resistance against the Germans. And 2 years after that, early one morning, he'd be driving in the back of a flatbed truck up the Italian coast to see the dead Mussolini hanging upside down in a Milan gas station. All of this, even the relating of it, seems as strange and removed from me as if I were relating events from 1,000,000 years ago. Waking up the next morning and watching the film again, I wasn't so sure what I discovered. Strangely, I was reminded of the one thing my father took with him across the refugee camps of Europe. It was a cracked '78 record of a Schubert song transposed into his native Albanian. It was one of the few recordings of an opera singer who had died young of throat cancer. I always thought maybe he carried it around for sentimental reasons. I wondered if we shared the same sense of astonishment at the music. The difference between us was that I could never understand the words. If anything, I now felt even further from these events of the last century. My father seeing the dead Mussolini, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and even the wide-eyed woman in the cafe, the one who tried to explain to me only a few years before that the internet would probably eliminate war forever that same spring as Sarajevo and Rwanda. But on that September night, me and my roommate Philip's more immediate task was to steal some beer from our local supermarket. In the aisle, we run into Micah and Leighton, old acquaintances of Philip as it turns out. One of them, Micah, has a black eye from being punched in a bar, and both are wearing derby hats and vests and looked as if they'd just been kicked out of a 1930s speakeasy. After we steal the beer, the four of us walk up the street to a bus stop. In front of an apartment building, we find a discarded desk and some chairs which we set up on the sidewalk. We started drinking, and Micah and Leighton started telling us of how they got back to San Francisco. It seems their car had died and they'd found themselves stranded in Wisconsin. In a shopping mall parking lot, they found an abandoned van. The The door was unlocked and the keys had been left in the ignition. In the back were 200 pair of expensive women's lingerie and 300 pair of Italian designer boots. In 2 days, they'd driven halfway across the country, arriving back in the Bay Area, only that afternoon. I doubted the story a little till Leighton showed me 2 brand new checks, totaling $1,700 from a local thrift store. I can remember little else of what the 4 of us talked about, but it all seemed to evoke a time that didn't exist anymore. 2 vagabonds driving a stolen van filled with women's underwear and Italian boots, the disbelieving reactions of the passing bus drivers at 4 grown men seated drinking around a discarded conference table, 2 of them with derby hats and 1 with a black eye.
I know you, Mr. Film Guy. It was a warehouse about a year ago.
What's up, man? That is so funny. What's going on, man? What's going on? Cheers.
I think I finally got a little of my 20th century that evening. When me and my roommate left Micah and Leighton, there was none of the ritual exchange of email addresses, business cards, or phone numbers. Philip and I walked back towards the house. In 20 minutes, we were asleep. The next morning, we'd find ourselves on the other side of history.